You know what? I think Oscar Piastri has well and truly cracked it. No, I think he literally cracked it. It's not just me stating an opinion, it's a fact. Although I do have some opinions surrounding that little bit of news that he chose to drop just out of nowhere. As we've reached the peak of the wilderness arc of the F1 season, and it's all headed toward orange flares and stroopwafels soon, I promise, Oscar Piastri casually dropped the news that he had fractured a rib with an ultrasound image of said injury dated Monday the 8th of July, the day after the British Grand Prix. Just so you know, it's not an X-ray as some people are reporting it, it's an ultrasound scan, there is a difference. This news was dropped by Oscar yesterday, a whole month, in fact more than a month after the ultrasound scan was conducted. And neither was this post focused solely on the injury. It was written almost like an afterthought when he posted the image and remarked on his social media, almost like he was just going, "Oh yeah, busted my rib. Wonderful." All this is doing is continuing a trend that especially has come about this year, that if you wish to get ahead and get success coming your way or bag your first victory, then you have to find yourself in somewhat physical peril. I mean, we saw that with Carlos Sainz and his appendicitis, mirroring what happened with Alex Albon a couple of years ago. So now they're going to the same team. You could say they are append pals. Lando with his bandaged face after a party, and now Oscar with his rib injury. But what makes this unique, though, is that we didn't hear about this before the race itself, but a whole month after it was diagnosed, which means it's pretty much healed by now. It's old news to him. Now, I must point out that appendicitis is not something to take lightly. It is a very serious condition. If you do not treat it and you don't get to it in time, it could cause some very major complications or even end your life. So I'm very glad that Carlos and Alex were able to come out of this with a full recovery and actually going on to do pretty well for themselves. So I'm really happy that they're okay. But just remember, I'm not comparing a cracked rib to appendicitis. Now, because of this, and given that news cycles are now especially sensitive when it comes to drivers and injuries, then Oscar Piastri's camp could have easily just brought up the news about the ultrasound scan not long after the British Grand Prix, saying, "Oh, well, Oscar was having to deal not only with tricky conditions, changeable conditions at that, but he was also having to deal with a rib injury, which has now been diagnosed, so that just makes it all the more tricky." It could have been played out for days, but it wasn't. It was not reported until just now, right when the summer break, the mandated shutdown has completed, and everyone's getting ready for Zandvoort. And now, we're just left rubbing our eyes and just going, oh my goodness, Oscar Piastri just had two of the best races of his F1 career, and he was dealing with that. Oh, I guess driving James Hunt's car last year at Goodwood really did give him big balls. Now, okay, I know you're probably rolling your eyes at me and thinking, oh great, Law's going to be gushing about Oscar Piastri again, just like he does in almost every other video and every single opportunity that he can. Look, I understand. I am an Oscar Piastri fan, I do want to make that clear. And if you look at my metrics, it doesn't help that a tenth of my audience is based in Australia. So if you are from Australia and you are watching, how you going? Oh, come on, me being a Pom, I need as much kudos with Aussies as I can get, okay? I do my best to keep my solely Piastri-dedicated content to a minimum, and I am critical of him when he does make a mistake. At Spa, it was his mess-up in the pits overshooting his markers which cost him pulling a back-to-back win. There are still plenty of things for him to discover, and he is prone to making mistakes, and I'm more than happy to call him out on it, and I'm more than happy to acknowledge when he has made a mistake. I am a Piastri fan, but yeah, he ain't perfect. He's getting there, and he's getting to become a really good F1 driver with a really long legacy ahead of him. There's still more for him to discover when it comes to fighting for wins, keeping consistent, and also not putting a foot wrong when it matters. But let's remember something here that is factually sound. The kid's done less than 40 races in F1. This is his statement season, much like how 2020, Lando's second season in Formula 1, was his statement season as well. Sure, this season for Oscar isn't just a full-blown guarantor for future success down the line, just because of what he's doing this year. It's not going to gift him a world championship or something like that. He has to go out there and earn it like everyone else. But this is a good stepping stone for a fairly fruitful Formula 1 career, like Lando's second season was for him, right at the beginning of 2020, with Austria and the Scenario 7 scenario. Look at what that did for Lando. People suddenly went, wow, Lando's really good. And that was a really, really good effort. Him getting the fastest lap, he was called Last Lap Lando. The same thing that's playing out for Oscar that they did for Lando in his sophomore year. In fact, you could even say it's almost an even bigger statement because it was the first race of the season after months of nothing after the Rony Rona. So even though Lando's going through a tricky phase of his F1 career right now, in terms of sophomore seasons, both McLaren drivers are doing the business when compared. And probably something that would tip Lando's season over the edge to make him have the more dominant sophomore year so far is that McLaren that year had the 4th fastest car, right behind the Mercedes, the Red Bull, and of course the Tracing Point. Look, what I'm trying to get at is that if Oscar makes a mistake, like if Lando makes a mistake, I will call him out on it. But in the case of this posting, this social media post, I don't think this was a mistake at all, nor do I think it was something purely innocent. It could be, I could be just blowing smoke up Oscar's bottom, but I do think there might be something more to it after what we saw back in 2022 when Oscar Piastri was introduced to the Formula 1 stage. I'll get to that in a moment, but just see where I'm going here. Granted, I don't think he's being flippant with this injury. It probably wasn't fun driving around the Hungaroring, one of the most physically intense tracks on the calendar, with that kind of thing, and you're strapped in so tightly that you can barely move your shoulders, but the casual attitude to the news just sums up Piastri in a nutshell. Maybe in his mind, cracking a rib or fracturing a rib, what have you, maybe it's just news that's not worth reporting considering how common it can be in motorsport to sustain that. It's almost par for the course that sometimes you are destined to do some kind of damage to your rib cage. After perusing the internet just for about 10 minutes or so, I found countless message boards and forums talking about drivers in karting especially. They're finding bruises or cracked ribs or something like that, and they're looking for advice in which to resolve it quickly as possible. And the truth of the matter is, though, is that in most cases, there's not really much you can do. You've got to rest up. These McLaren drivers can't do that. There is potentially a chase for the team title at play here, and both men are trying to state a case for McLaren to not give the other driver team orders to give them the advantage of being the #1 driver. That and injuring your rib is not particularly obvious, so it wouldn't really come across as somewhat dramatic in terms of the media and in terms of news postings. You know, cracking your rib, well, it's not entirely visual. It's not like Carlos Sainz being seen in a hospital bed or something like that, having recovered, and I'm really glad that he did recover, and I'm just again pointing out that appendicitis is not something to laugh at. And then of course the really artistic bandaging that Lando's mates did when he did cut his nose, it made it look worse than it actually was. And I think it just goes back to something that Piastri's been talking about for a very long time, that actions speak louder than words. Now, you could argue that if this injury is nothing new, then why would he even mention it? That is a fair point. Why draw attention to it after the fact, when it's all done and dusted and he's healed up? Why are you making a video about it, Law? Well, I mean, if you want the honest answer, I just wanted to find an excuse in which to do a little bit of wordplay that I used for the title of this video. You know, Oscar Piastri's cracked it. It was too good to pass up. For you see, I am a simple man. I see wordplay, I chuckle. Ultimately, though, this could be one of two things, or even both things for that matter. It can be seen as both Oscar going, wow, I'm sure glad I got a break to properly rest up after that break, as well as, oh, this? Yeah, that was annoying. Still want to race anyway. I've been knocking around the internet since I was about like 9, so nearly 30 years at this point, and one thing I've learned in my time as I've seen the internet evolve, especially in social media, is that usually if you're posting something, it tends to be deliberate. If you're sharing things, you want people to know. Now, Oscar didn't have to mention about his injury. It could have just come up in light conversation. People at the Dutch Grand Prix would have been asking, oh, hey, Oscar, how did you spend your summer break? And he could have just gone, well, I was just recovering after a rib injury, but other than that, I had a really good time. And it could have just been a one-sentence thing, but no. He showed us the receipt. So he was going through 2 of the most difficult races on the calendar with an injury, and an injury that would be persistent throughout the entire time. Again, you're belted up really, really tightly. You cannot move. It is going to hurt. In my honest opinion, I think this could have been a little bit of a power play. A little bit of a mind game. Okay, if you're thinking that, Law, then who is it aimed at? Who is he trying to undermine or trying to get under the skin of? Well, I mean, it could be the world for underrating him for the longest time. It could be the rest of the grid to watch out for him. It could be aimed toward Max Verstappen for the future. It could be aimed at his team or aimed at his teammate. I think there is something, especially in recent months, that people have tended to forget, that even though Oscar Piastri is known for his wordplay, his wit, his dry humour, the comparisons to Kimi Räikkönen, no, he can be extremely cold and ruthless when he needs to. When push comes to shove, he is not afraid to do something that will better his career. And that is something that has probably been exacerbated ever since Mark Webber took over as his manager before the 2020 F3 season came about. And may I remind you of August 2nd 2 years ago, what has now become in the world of F1 fandom as Oscar Piastri Day. The news that he said that Alpine had brokered a deal with him even though that wasn't the case and he wouldn't be driving for Alpine the following year. That actually set the tone for what was to come with Alpine, and being viewed steadily as less and less competent, and more people leaving, the team is where it is right now. For those first few weeks, Piastri was painted as the villain, dropping the team that had sunk so much money into his future career, the millions of development time, the hours spent in old Renault cars, and the man-hours also spent in crafting Oscar into what he is today for the media. Otmar Safnauer was the front for this push, and questioned Piastri's integrity. Alpine were quick to disparage him and turn the world against him, and it would have worked had it not come to light that the team were guilty of gross incompetence when it came to contract negotiations and using Oscar in a game of chicken with Alonso. The aftertaste, though, even when he went to McLaren, was somewhat bitter, and it really didn't help that the MCL 60 at the time was absolutely garbage. But then McLaren did start to do well, and Oscar came out of his shell for the world to see, after the jetpack man fell over and Oscar did a funny face. People forgot about the vicious power play and saw the wisecracking coolness and the comparisons to Kimi Räikkönen that are now spreading like wildfire in terms of his underplayed responses to situations and rarely getting in a flap about, well, anything. But in my humble opinion, I think this comparison is inaccurate. I did think the comparison was cute and relevant a while ago, but now that I've had some time to think about it, I don't think it's really accurate because sure, Kimi was quite quiet, but because the difference here is that Oscar has, as of now, not gotten angry about anything. At worst, he's got mildly grumpy. Kimi did get angry at things. May I remind you of 2017 especially about the gloves and steering wheel. Come on! And he tells people to shut up. Leave me alone, I know what I'm doing. He's known for his quips as much as Alonso is known for making his radio quips. Oscar, most of the time, is like, well, that was a bit of a silly thing to do. Oh, well, you know, Yuki just turned into me. Oh, well. Then that's pretty much the tone. I think a better comparison to make with Oscar and a Finn is the Finn that was the flying Finn, Mika Häkkinen. He, like Kimi, was quite minimal when it came to words, but I don't recall him ever blowing up on the radio. And even though Oscar is relatively neutral with his voice, he, like Mika, did give decently lengthy statements when he needed to, whereas Kimi is famously blunt and minimal with his words. Häkkinen was slightly more verbose, and he wasn't afraid to show off his cheeky side as well, especially throwing water at Michael in a press conference and then running away. Just think about it and come back to me in a year or two. I think Oscar is more like Mika than he is to Kimi. But going back to the ruthless streak here, even though Mika ultimately showed that he did have a really good sense of humour, when push came to shove though, on the track, he was one of the most cold and most ruthless drivers on the grid, and Michael Schumacher himself, one of the greatest drivers in F1 history, I don't count Lewis at the moment because he's still writing his story as of now, Michael feared Mika. He was the only championship rival that he did so. The rest, he did respect, but Mika, no. He was very cautious with the guy. There was great respect from both men, and Mika wasn't afraid to call out Michael for his antics, and not afraid to race him hard. May I remind you of Spa 2000 with that overtake going into Sector 2? One of the most daring overtakes in F1 history? It takes guts to do that. Oscar posting that could have been a power play, a shot across the bow to all concerned, maybe even toward Lando himself. Because let's be real, mind games between teammates and other drivers is nothing new, and they will continue as long as there is a competitive sport in which to witness. And I can think of one pretty successful mind game in recent years to bring to your attention. The one between Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso in 2007. Throughout that first year, Lewis's rookie year, he was not afraid to get under the skin of Fernando Alonso. Lewis constantly saying, hey, I'm just taking things one race at a time. Remember, I'm just a rookie. I'm just doing my job. And yeah, I managed to get some wins and podiums. That's really nice. But hey, no, Fernando's the top dog. He's the guy. Yeah, don't pay attention to me. Although do pay attention to me because I am absolutely rocking his world and I am completely eviscerating him after him being able to come out on top against Michael Schumacher, one of the greatest drivers in F1 history. Yeah, I'm making a statement here. And because of that, it really aggravated Fernando, who expected to be the team leader at McLaren. And then this rookie comes along and almost beats him to the World Championship by a matter of a singular point. That is absolutely insane. And again, Alonso would have been completely destabilised because he beat Schumacher twice, and then Lewis almost beats him, and then Kimi beat them both. It destabilised the Spaniards somewhat that you got something almost as bitter as the rivalry that Senna and Prost had. It got ugly. And it resulted in Spygate getting even worse than it actually was, because Alonso wasn't afraid to spill some tea alongside his mate Pedro de la Rosa. He's also up to it again with the likes of Aston Martin and dropping the Adrian Newey news in terms of using past tense and present tense. Hamilton Alonso, it got cold. In fact, I think it's even worse than Hamilton and Rosberg. Hamilton and Rosberg, I think, is more tragic than bitter. I think it was just sad. They used to be friends. Whereas Hamilton and Alonso, no, they weren't friends. There was less love lost. I'm glad that Fernando and Lewis have come to terms with it, and they realised that their feud at the time did get silly, and they have reconciled somewhat, although they do still butt heads from time to time. As for Oscar, this could be yet another example of a mind game disguised as banter. The reaction to his underplayed injury has been that of surprise and further adding positive sentiment from social media toward the Australian. And I do see that in the days that have followed the last two races, the arguments against Oscar are slowly starting to diminish. The whole idea of, oh, Oscar doesn't manage his tyres well, he's a tyre killer, he's not a tyre whisperer like George or something like that. Yeah, okay, that is a fair point, but I think a lot of people in the comments of my videos have really brought up a good point, that instead of Oscar just shredding his tyres willy-nilly, it's more like he's figured out when to pick his battles. So he's preserving the tyres when he needs to, and using them when he needs to. So he's trying to do it at the right time instead of just all the time. And this is all in the midst of the world's press starting to look more dimly toward Lando Norris, and social media positively crucifying the Brit, which I think is getting wholly unjustified, and the hate toward Norris is just ridiculous at this point, and it needs to stop. What's the point? All of this coming from comments that he made years ago, they're now coming to roost, and now he's living to regret that he even said it, and they were aimed toward Lewis Hamilton. And one thing that we've learnt in social media is that you do not mess with Lewis Hamilton, especially social media related to Lewis Hamilton. So now that Lando Norris is in a position where he has the fastest car, and now you're getting the situation where you're getting hypocrisy in the order, it's just not going good for Lando, is it? He gets his win, you think people would have laid off on him and allowed him to focus on getting more wins, but no, it's gotten worse. And if you're a Lando Norris fan watching this, believe me, I don't want this to happen. Lando needs as much support as we can get. He's meant to be the next British hope, and now right now he's being torn a new one, like George is being torn a new one. At this point, I think Oliver Behrman, good luck, Oliver. And then, of course, we got the situation in the cool-down room after the British Grand Prix, where Lewis was reaching out to Lando, and Lando bit back, and Lewis was taken by surprise at the time. After that, Lewis did say, yeah, no, it's fine, I get it. He was just a little bit hot-headed. Look, I've been around Formula 1 for 20 years almost. I get it, I understand. Lewis was cool about it, so just be cool about it. Lewis, he weren't bothered. Right now, there's a lot of talk going on about the situation regarding team orders at McLaren. Who's going to be the main priority there? Should a driver's title be up for grabs this year? Even though I personally don't think there is going to be one had right now and this year, and the team should really instead energise their drivers to working together and grabbing the team title. You know, since the team itself is guilty for being a little bit cack-handed when it comes to team strategy and whatnot, they are still figuring themselves out. They are boning up on how to be at the front, much like how Aston Martin were trying to figure themselves out at the beginning of last year when they realised that, oh, we're the second fastest team. Neat. And then that didn't happen anymore. I'm happy that McLaren are up at the top, but I'm also frustrated that there have been so many chances to capitalise on that good qualifying and the fact the car is really, really good. Just, where are the results? It should be clear as day. They should be leading the championship right now, but they're not. But, okay, the time will come, but it's not right now in terms of the driver's title. But the talk about who is number one at McLaren will not go away. And the way that tabloids in the overall F1 is headed, it's not in the direction of Lando anymore, and instead, it might be turning around and slowly being pointed toward Oscar. And I've seen this really, really obviously with all of the graphics that all of the F1 news sites are making. Have you noticed this? In the last couple of weeks, they've done, in the last 5 races, in the last 6 races, in the last 8 races, not including the first 5 races where Max Verstappen was dominant and Piastri was struggling, that, oh, look at Max and Lewis and Oscar and all these people scoring points, and Lando, he, in comparison, has scored less points. It's made other drivers look better than what they actually are when you look at the entire season as a whole. Because let's remember, the first 5 races, Max was on course to another dominant year. And even though I do look at them occasionally and go, that's nice. I'm glad that Oscar's getting some recognition. I step back and go, wait a minute, I see what they're doing here. They're trying to make this into a title race when really it's not a title race at the moment. So just if you ever see them, just take them with a pound of salt, okay? It's nice to look at as a little giggle or like a, oh, that's nice. But just don't take it seriously. Look, I understand if you think I'm really overly reading into this. I get it. It's quite subtle. But Oscar sharing this ultrasound scan might be the next phase of him showcasing his ability to make it in F1. He sees Lando's cut nose and raises him a broken rib. The summer is over. The teams are now starting to go back to work to prepare for the second half of the season, as are the drivers. They are starting to get their minds back in the game. And what better way to announce it, now that everyone's clamoring for F1 news, for Oscar and his team to drop this news and go, hey, those last 2 races where I did really, really well, and I almost could have had 2 races in a row in terms of victories, yeah, I was dealing with a broken rib. How about that, eh? It's just obvious to me. I do feel like this is him going to McLaren, hey, don't discount me just yet. And he's capitalizing on the social media backlash toward Lando's comments that he made last year, 4 years ago. Again, I do think it's overplayed here and it's ridiculous. But the fact is, though, I'm just one guy. It's happening. I can't control it. That's just the way it's going. There are people just tearing Lando a new one, whereas they're looking at Oscar and they're suddenly going, oh, that guy's pretty good. Oh, he's quite understated. Oh, he was doing that with an injury? Oh, this is just playing into Mark Webber's hands. This was orchestrated by Mark, in my honest opinion. I don't think we'll know the full truth here, but I just do find it a big surprise here. And the reaction to my quote tweet from this was just evident that I needed to talk about it in some way, because I do think that Oscar has fully cracked it when it comes to being a Formula 1 driver and how to handle yourself. He's gotten through the rough patch. He's now in the honeymoon phase, which he didn't get at the start because people were going, hey, Oscar Piastri, wasn't he the guy that betrayed Alpine or something? And now look at him. He's at the second slowest team. Oh, he chose poorly. He should have stuck with Alpine. And then that didn't happen. Let's not forget that Oscar is not afraid to be ruthless when he needs to be. He just chooses his moments to do so. The banter and wit is nice to have, and the understated radio messages are refreshing as well, but make no mistake, Oscar is staking a claim to either call time on team orders for this year, or to state that he is the one McLaren should back in the years to come. Honestly, after years of McLaren being in the wilderness, I would rather have both drivers working together to get McLaren back up to the top, getting up into the top 2 of the constructors, or better yet, winning it, and then going from there. If they want to try and decide who's got the biggest willy in terms of drivers, then have at it in 2025. But then again, this is the disciple of Mark Webber we're talking about here, so we've really got to be looking at this with close attention here. This might be the next phase of the dynamic between Oscar and Lando. Just watch this space, okay? Much like how you should watch how the talks with Aston Martin and Adrian Newey are playing out. Ferrari giving up on the designer speaks volumes as to where the balance of power in F1 might go between the two. Something that I discuss more of in this video here that you can go and watch right now. I shall see you there.